Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint, which is exactly what we are carrying on discussing today, the Rejuvenate Blueprint, the 7 root causes of diseases. And what we have decided to do is a series breaking down each of the 7 root causes and looking at them from a practitioner's point of view. And this is part 2 of the first one, genetics. So we're carrying on the discussion here. If you haven't seen it, we'll make sure we put the link below in the description so you won't miss it. And please remember, if you've got any suggestions or any comments on YouTube, because that's where we're really being able to look at those, let us know. We love hearing from you. You guys are a great community, and we really enjoy spending our time with you. So we're looking at this today, part 2 of genetics, of how a practitioner can really look at certain things to help their clients when they're coming to them with certain things like weight loss, etc. And that's what we're diving into today. So Elwyn, do you want to give us a quick recap on part 1, and then we can dive into looking at what a practitioner would be looking at for their clients?
Thank you, Chrissy. Yeah, very quickly. So practitioners often don't have hours to pour through their reports in details for every client or patient, right? It's just not practical in most cases. Some doctors only have 10 minutes of a patient full stop. Even like a functional medicine practitioner is usually like an hour and a half appointment at the most, in which case you're going to want to do a lot of other things other than look at genetics. So realistically, as a practitioner, you probably have 10 to 20 minutes to actually look through people's results. And so I've had a few practitioners, doctors of all kinds, ask me how you would use Genetic Insights for clients. They've already used it for themselves and, spent time going through everything, but how do you do it when you have a limited amount of time, which is a great question. And so in the previous episode, we talked about lots of what I would do generally. And of course, the system I'm using is the Rejuvenate Blueprint. This is the 7 root causes of all chronic disease that I've identified, and that it's one of the main missions of this podcast is to share about those. And so the first part is about genetics. There are genetic bases, or at least there is either a genetic basis, or at least there is a genetic factor to a lot of chronic diseases. Doesn't mean it's the only thing. There's often other things that are going on as well in order to make that manifest as a disease, but still there are genetic factors. Some people are more susceptible than others, and we can look at that risk and we can help people to mitigate that risk. As I said in the previous episode, one of the biggest differences going through people's genetic results for a practitioner versus a normal client, customer, end user is that if you're a normal person, you probably don't already have very fixed and detailed ideas about how to resolve all kinds of things. And so what you'll do is spend most of the time actually downloading reports and reading through those reports and looking especially at the recommendations. Those recommendations are tailored especially for your genetics, as well as other factors about you. And so that's what you're going to spend most of the time doing. As a practitioner, you probably already have, in most cases, very specific ideas about how you resolve various things that may vary person per person. I probably spent a bit too long in the last episode giving examples about that, how different practitioners, would have different approaches to different things. And so you're going to spend a lot less time downloading those reports. And honestly, a lot of the time you may not download any reports. You're just using this to get a general sense of what's going on with a person, what their risks are, and then once you know that, you already know what you would do about those various issues in most cases. And so if that sounds a bit abstract, then obviously we're going to get into practical examples of that in the rest of the episode today.
Beautiful. So yeah, you did mention getting into those practical examples. And also too, what's really nice is what you just made, that distinction of how a client or just anybody that's purchasing this may go through it, downloading the reports and really diving deep into, what does it say, and having that deep look. But those practitioners, they're just not going to have that much time. As you said, they do have a limited amount of time, and there's so much information in these genetic reports that they can't quite claw through it. But what we're going to be looking at today is how they can potentially identify where they can help clients with these certain, issues that they're coming to them with, and that they can have a quick scan and go through. So that's really great. I love it that you're actually showing us how you look through these reports as well, so that we can get an idea of, this is what we're going to do at home. But these are some ways that you can identify these patterns, these groupings, and that you can utilize these genetics to really give us more insightful information.
Yes. And if you're watching this audio only on Apple or Spotify or whatever, that's fine. This should all still make sense, but it may make more sense if you see the visual element. So you may want to check, the YouTube or Rumble version to maybe see sometimes what we're referring to. But I'm going to read out everything that we're talking about, so it's not essential. So one of the bits of advice I'd give practitioners, which I'd give anyone going through genetic insights, is do not start with the view that you actually start off with as a default, which is where it says browse by category at the top, because that basically means no category is selected. And so it basically means you have, you could scroll through for several minutes, scrolling past hundreds of reports that are on all kinds of different unrelated topics. And it's very easy to get confused and overwhelmed, even as a practitioner. I'd strongly encourage to start with this category selecting tool here, and select the category that is of interest to you in order to help the client. And so in the previous episode, part 1 of this, we looked at some of the general categories that I look at for everyone, like nutrition, detoxification, hormonal health. I think we looked at emotional well-being, a few things like that. We may still touch upon those in this section, but in this session, in this recording, we're going to look specifically at how we would help people who come to us with specific complaints. And so I think we picked a couple last time, and you suggested one, Chrissy, that actually also was relevant for this person. So that's perfect. So this, this person shared their details anonymously. I think I put my name in there, but this is not me. I have also shared my results previously. They're different. And so this will give some insight. Now, I'm aware that even though this is a practitioner guide, there's going to be a lot of non-practitioners watching this who are interested as well. So I probably will still give a fair bit of explanation of what I'm doing. But what we'll try and remember to do at the end, Chris, is what we did in the previous episode. So, it may take me 20 minutes to go through one category because I'm explaining stuff. But then at the end, we'll remember I'll go through it as quick as I would if I were a practitioner and this was an actual consultation. In which case, rather than taking 20 minutes to go through a category, I might take 2 minutes or less, because it really is that simple. Once you already know what all these things mean, if you're a practitioner who already has, very specific ideas about what you do, if a person had these particular tendencies, risks, then it can be very quick to go through everything.
Yeah, that was really one of my favorite bits at the end of part 1, that you're like, okay, we're going to go here. We're going to look at this. We're going to go here. Okay, let's go here because that's indicating that. I was like, wow, that was really great. Because I just get caught up and like, oh, let me go into that report. Oh, I got to download it. Oh, let me sift through. So it was actually really quite nice to see you doing that. So fantastic. And my dog thinks so too. So, so great. Why don't you kick us off with our first practical, looking at weight loss.
Yeah. And so, honestly, if I am doing a session with a client, because unlike almost every other practitioner, my specialty is only genetics. So I probably will spend an hour and sometimes even more just going through someone's genetics. So the speed I'm doing it through the first part of the episode is probably the speed I do it with them, because I spend a while explaining stuff to them. But the speed that I did it at the end that you just referenced there, Chrissy, is probably what I would do if I was preparing beforehand. Like when I'm doing reconnaissance or whatever you want to call it, a little bit of research on the person before I speak to them, I'll just flick through them. Okay, yeah. So they've already emailed me. They've told me they've got these issues, this history. This is what they want to focus on. So I'll just have a flick through. Okay, so they've got this. And it gives me an idea already, what we're going to focus on and what we're going to talk about before we even speak. And then when I'm with them, I often spend a while longer explaining stuff, just because that's my role. My role is to walk them through the genetics and explain it to them. But of course, with most practitioners, that's not their role. Their role is to help them with whatever health problems they've come in with. And so, you would want to buzz through it a lot more quickly. Anyway, I probably belabored that point enough. So first thing is to go to this category selection thing and select something. Now, as I said, if someone is overweight, we're going to presume here, if they've gone as far as to investigate their genetics, that they've probably already tried at least some of the obvious stuff, right? They've probably already tried dieting. They've probably already tried an exercise regime. maybe they've tried fasting, whatever. And so the question is not normally like the very basics of how to lose weight. The question is, why can't I lose weight? Why is it not working? Is there some genetic factor getting in the way? And weight loss is something that I've never struggled with being overweight. So for a long time, I didn't talk about this subject because I felt like, you have to have suffered, I guess, to really understand someone. But I have to say, I've helped so many people with this now, that I feel fairly confident to talk about it, because even if I haven't suffered from it, I've worked with a lot of people who have, and I feel for them. I have to say that this idea that some popular figures like celebrities or thought leaders or pundits, whatever you want to call them, say if you can't lose weight, you're just overeating, you're just lazy, you're just this. I hate it. Not because of it's mean or emotionally, whatever, but because it's just not true. And I just hate things that are not true. I mean, of course, in some cases, it can be as simple as that. But I've seen again and again and again examples of people where they really do try. And then it's the case of, even if, let's say, someone isn't sticking to a diet or they aren't sticking to an exercise thing, I don't look at it like, oh, well, then it's your own fault. Although I do heavily believe in personal responsibility, I want to ask the question, well, why can't they stick to it? If they're not sticking to an exercise thing, maybe they're exhausted, maybe they're in pain, maybe there's something else going on. If they're not sticking to a diet thing, maybe it's because their diet that they're trying to stick to is not actually meeting their nutritional needs, So I want to actually understand what's really going on with the person. And I think the reason why over 95% of diets fail but in the definition of after a year, any weight that you lost has come back on, often with even more. I think one of the reasons for that is because of the very generic one-size-fits-all advice that doesn't acknowledge that, different people have different problems and different reasons why they can't lose weight or why they put on weight or whatever. And so we're going to look at a few of those examples here. And so again, I will spend longer going for this category than I would have a client, because I'll look at what the problem is with this person, but I'll also scroll through and look at some of the other things that it could have been, but it wasn't in this person's case. And I won't do that too exhaustively because I know we want to go through a bunch of categories, but I'll do a bit of that. So in this case, all right, so this sort by risk thing is automatically on. I've gone to the category of weight loss. And so straight away, I see a combination of things that, perhaps appear to be unrelated. So let's just break them down. So the very first thing I see here is a high tendency for stress. The reason why I included stress in the weight loss category is because, of course, as is well known, I think this is mainstream these days, people who are highly stressed find it more difficult to lose weight. High levels of stress often mean high cortisol. High cortisol is associated with your weight gain, whether it's fluid retention, weight around the belly, but also fat gain as well. And so that's something we want to know. Plus, if you're stressed, a lot of people, although not everyone, maybe, but a majority of people, when they're stressed, they're more likely to overeat and they're less likely to look after themselves in general. And so, of course, it is a relevant factor. So that's why I include it here, even though it's not obviously weight loss. We can see that this person has a tendency to put on fat on the belly specifically. So that tells us something, and we can ask them, if that's the case for them. And if it is, then there's that genetic tendency for it. We can also see, I'm going to ignore these genes for a moment. So the next one I look at is this one, weight regain. So you can say to the client, when you lose weight, you find that you gain it back again very quickly. If they say yes, then you can say, okay, there seems to be a genetic basis for that. Now, I see seems to be because with these like belly fat and weight regain, all they're really pointing to is correlation. So we haven't really got to cause yet. All we said is people with your SNPs, people with your specific genetic mutations that everyone has, there's a correlation between them and these specific symptoms. And then we can say, do you have them? And if so, it gives some, credence to the idea that there may be a genetic factor going on. Of course, if they say no to those things, no, I don't regain weight easily. It's just I find it hard to lose in the first place. Or no, I don't have belly fat. It's more around my hips or shoulders or whatever. Then okay, then fair enough. But more often than not, it is actually accurate. And so that helps us to say, okay, there's a genetic component. Next, I see sugar cravings. And if I keep scrolling it down, I also see tendency to overeat and carbohydrates. Now, those three things together are potentially an issue. So
And
let's
why
talk
would
about
that?
carbohydrates.
I was going to say, why would those three things in particular have a tendency to be an issue?
In fact, yeah, I mean, I don't think this is all it is for this person. They have a thyroid thing going on as well, which we talked about in the last episode. That would also be worth testing and probably addressing. But if someone is struggling to lose weight, it could be as simple as this triumvirate right here. This is all you'd really need to create a person who struggles to lose weight. Because, to answer your question, okay, so in terms of carbohydrates, there are three basic different types. And in fact, again, the practitioner, you wouldn't have to do this, but I will actually look at this report just to show you what it says. So yeah, you should be able to see this report now. And so, it introduces this idea of what carbohydrates are, different types of carbohydrates, but this is the key page. So if I were to look at any page as a practitioner, then this is the page that I'm going to want to look at. And so this is where it gives a risk score. It tells you the relevant genes and SNPs. In this case, some of our reports literally are based on millions of different SNPs that are all calculated, but this one is just based on one, which is listed here. You can see it, RS790314666. And this person has the genotype TT, which basically means that they have more of a hunter-gatherer type of genetic. So what does that mean? It talks here about 12,000 years ago, but I think for some of us it's longer, like 20, 30,000 years ago. Some of our ancestors started to consume much more carbohydrate in the diet, and this is really down to agriculture. Some of our ancestors worked out that, rather than hunting and foraging for food, we could actually grow our own food, and then we have more guaranteed food. Maybe we can also store our own food, then we have guaranteed food. And the type of food that was easier to grow and store would be more higher carbohydrate food, as opposed to hunting, which would be more protein and fats. So some of our ancestors switched to eating more higher carbohydrate. And that has some benefits in terms of being able to kind of grow a whole civilization, like ancient Egypt's an example of this, but also they've done studies of some of the pharaohs and stuff even in ancient Egypt, and they had kind of signs of eating a very high grain, high carb diet, like the demineralization, for instance, of the teeth and bones, for instance, and like signs of chronic diseases that you'd expect to someone on a very high grain diet. But anyway, ancient pharaohs aside, the point is that over thousands of years, human beings have adapted more to that kind of high carb diet, or at least some of them did, and some of them didn't. Of course, there are some hunter-gatherer tribes right now still on this planet. Not many, but so there's the hunter-gatherer versus farmer, and then there's also just the distinction of climate, right? So those who come from a very, very cold climate will tend to get more carbs from protein and fat. Those who come from a more tropical climate would be more likely to get more calories from carbohydrates. And so this person has hunter-gatherer DNA. That's the point. So that means that they are more suited to have a lower carbohydrate diet. And as it says, in people with this variant, even complex carbs like whole grains tend to spike blood sugar. So the opposite type, the farmer type, they do quite well. It says here, in people with the opposite type, carbs don't tend to spike blood sugar. So meaning even the simple carbs, even the ones you're told not to have, like sugar or honey or whatever, they will not spike blood sugar significantly in people with the opposite genetics. And so this is very relevant information. And if I now go back to this triumvirate I was talking about, so if this person does poorly with basically every type of carbs, and when I say does poorly, spikes blood sugar, again, I know practitioners know this, but for our non-practitioners watching, listening. Spiking blood sugar means spiking insulin. Spiking insulin often means a blood sugar crash. That could short-term create hyperglycemia, it could create stress, raised cortisol, raised noradrenaline, all that kind of stuff. Medium to long-term, it can lead to insulin resistance and even diabetes and all the rest of it. So this is a big deal, this tendency for the blood sugar to spike.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us, or many people don't know, that when they're eating, that there are these things going on internally, like, how your body's responding to certain foods that will either spike your glucose a lot or maybe not so much. And so that's also having a massive knock-on effect where it could be producing more inflammation. And like you're saying, it's going on that massive up and down in these different swings with your insulin levels, your glucose levels, etc.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things you can control, as you said, that can help with that or make that worse, that we talk about in other episodes. Like we have a full hypoglycemia episode and a full insulin resistance episode. But all that report we just looked at is saying that all other things being equal, a person with that type of genetics will tend to respond poorly to carbohydrate compared to someone with the opposite type of genetics. Again, all other factors being equal. And so with that being the case, when we look at, so that's a problem, but that's only a problem in theory, because if a person eats low to moderate levels of carbohydrates, they make sure they stick to complex carbohydrates, they may not have such an issue with blood sugar despite having that genetics, especially, if you have protein with your carbs, then that helps to reduce that insulin spike and blood sugar spike, especially if you have fat with your carbs. That will tend to slow down the release of the carbs into the bloodstream, and that will reduce the blood sugar spike. And if you have fiber with it, that will also slow down the release of the sugar into the blood. And so if you are eating a kind of more hunter-gatherer, paleo-ish, keto-ish, carnivore-ish kind of diet, then some carbs is probably going to be fine in most cases, although there are, all kinds of studies, all kinds of anecdotes of people transforming their health by going on a ketogenic diet. So obviously it is miraculous for a lot of people. I know a lot of our viewers are, not a fan of that, but again, I don't want to deny anyone's reality. I know some of them are, and for some people, it really helps them. And I would suggest that category of people who it does really help they're probably, a lot of them are going to be in that genetic type. They're going to be in that genetic type who just responds poorly to carbs, and therefore all the stuff that you've learned about the benefits of carbs is not as true for them because they just don't respond to it as well, and it's just the way it is. So anyway, all that debate aside, this person doesn't respond as well to carbs, but that's not innately a problem, because if they just ate like, well, me, with plenty of protein, plenty of fat, only complex carbs, then they would be fine. But they've also got sugar cravings. So they've also got cravings for sweet food. Even if they really avoid sweet food, and let's say they're only eating, drinking diet sodas and they're using stevia and stuff like that, the research has shown that even those fake sweeteners still potentially can trigger insulin released, so they can still create a problem. So if the person's tendency is this blood sugar issue, and we'll look at the blood sugar category next, then these sugar cravings are definitely a problem, or definitely can be a problem. And we can see actually just up here, I know we ignore genes for now, but they have at least one gene here where they have potentially an issue of blood sugar, but we may look into that more in a minute. So that's not great if a person has these sugar cravings, but now let's add on to that as well also a tendency to overeat. So there's this concept called the glycemic index, which I'm sure most people are aware of, which is the speed at which the carbohydrates you're eating will hit your blood sugar. It's basically what it means. But there's also this concept called the glycemic load. So I think there's a lot of focus on glycemic index.
Right. I was going to say, what's the difference between glycemic load and I mean, index is telling you, I'm assuming it's how fast it's going to spike your blood sugar. But what's load when they're referring to glycemic load?
So glycemic load is glycemic index times quantity. So meaning if you're like, oh yeah, don't have white rice, don't have white bread because that's a high glycemic index, it's going to spike your blood sugar more. True, but let's say 10 grams of white rice will still not hit your blood sugar as much as 100 grams of, or let's say 100 grams of carbs from a supposedly safe form like beans. Right? Beans are definitely lower glycemic index, but if you have more of the carbs from even a low glycemic index source, still ultimately the net total impact on blood sugar is still going to be significant. And so that's why I think the tendency to overeat is significant, because this person potentially will crave sweet food, but they will also overeat sweet food if they give in to their instincts, because the tendency is to overeat in general, and then they don't respond to it well. So that potentially is a recipe for blood sugar dysregulation. And blood sugar dysregulation is absolutely a root cause for weight gain, inability to lose weight, right? So we've found here potentially a root cause, which is blood sugar dysregulation. The other potential root cause is stress, we've already talked about, and potentially high cortisol. That's another root cause for weight gain or difficulty with weight loss. And then a third one is thyroid dysfunction. So in this case, I didn't add all the versions of the thyroid hormone. I only added 3T3 because it's the most important one. That's the one that actually goes into the cells and stimulates the metabolism. So that's a potential root cause. And so with all of these are only risks or tendencies. So we don't know if any of them are definitely manifested in this person. So but these are then questions to ask. We can help to narrow it down, and tests to do to see if they're accurate, So in the case of 3T3, we can do a thyroid panel. In the case of stress, we can do, cortisol, DHEA, maybe sex hormones, which are often suppressed when stress is high. And in the case of carbohydrate sugar cravings, we could do A1C, insulin, and fasting glucose. And that will tell us, which of these factors are actually relevant. Now, I won't spend too long on this, but, there are other things that could have been an issue. So we'll just scroll down a little bit. We can see, saturated fat may be the problem. Again, I think the community who generally watches this, we are a fan of saturated fat, especially because we're not a fan of omega-6s and seed oils because they're inflammatory and they slow down the metabolism and stuff. But some people with some genetics, they don't respond well to saturated fat. And it is something that potentially causes weight gain. Yes, even coconut oil. I know that coconut oil overall speeds up metabolism, but I've absolutely had clients who are like, I started eating loads of coconut oil because, they
It's good for
the
me.
animal studies.
Yeah, I heard it's
Well,
good
the
for
animal
me.
studies where if you feed them loads of coconut oil, they actually lose weight, right? Whereas if you feed them soy oil, they gain weight, all that kind of stuff. But again, that was in whatever livestock. It doesn't mean it's going to be the case for you. And so for some people, saturated fat will do it. For some people, especially men, lack of testosterone will do it, right? It's well known that low testosterone correlates with weight gain. For some people, hypoglycemia obviously is a factor. We talked about that already. Metabolic syndrome, leptin. Leptin is the hormone that signals satiety. And so if that's high, it indicates one kind of problem. But if there's a genetic tendency for it to be low, that could be, another reason why someone might overeat, like a direct hormonal reason. Let's see, cortisol we talked about already. Progesterone. If progesterone is low and or estrogen is high, then that could be a factor why someone would struggle to lose weight. Thyroid. We can see with this person, actually, they also have a tendency for a low metabolic rate. We can see that there. It's probably a mistake that it's... I'd say it's a mistake that it's marked orange, not red. But of course, mainstream science these days is thinking that a low metabolic rate is perhaps good. So
Right.
that's where in our genetic stuff we always go with the mainstream rather than my theories. But yes, this person also has a tendency for low metabolic rate, so that may be a root cause. Estrogen dominance could be, but it's not in this case, according to genetics. This person also has a tendency for high blood sugar, so that just further confirms what we were talking about earlier. Their tendency for blood sugar spikes. Not really surprised when we see the worst response to carbohydrates. Depression can obviously potentially be a cause for weight gain as well. Many people, when they're depressed, they do have a tendency to overeat. And depression, from my point of view, is kind of is slowing down of the nervous system and the metabolism. It's kind of when a person's in a part hibernation state. And so, of course, that's related to weight gain. Oxytocin, low levels of oxytocin can make people crave to overeat, especially overeat fatty foods, and so and sweet foods as well. Basically, it's kind of a like they want breast milk. What's the word? Like equivalence,
Right.
adult
Right.
equivalence.
Yeah.
If you're low in oxytocin, so things sweet and fatty can be especially appealing if you are chronically low in oxytocin for genetic reasons. High levels of prolactin can cause weight gain, especially around the chest for men and women. So you see, there's loads of things it could be, loads of things that we could have tested for, and loads of things, that if we were to pursue all of these possibilities as a practitioner, it would take a lot of time. And if we were to test for them more, it would take a lot of money. And obviously, some of those things may still be factors. Just because it's not in the person's genetics doesn't mean it's guaranteed that it's not a factor for them. But it means that we can start with the most obvious stuff. And we can start with, so we've already said, blood sugar, thyroid, and stress. Those would be the things that I would start with for that person. And so on a practical level, what would that look like? Well, again, that depends on the practitioner, but just very simply, if they're low on thyroid and they're already, dialed in nutrition and stuff, then we may support their thyroid with some bioidentical, T3 or maybe some desiccated thyroid, something like that. In the case of, high stress, we may support them, again, hormonally, if it's a woman with progesterone, say. If it's a man, maybe with testosterone. And in the case of blood sugar, that's a bit more complicated, but we would, try and encourage them with a diet of maybe not full ketogenic, but like a diet that helps to keep the blood sugar balanced, let's say that, which de-emphasizes large amounts of carbohydrates.
Exactly. And as you were talking about as well, combining your foods, not just like if somebody's going to sit down and eat a bag of potato chips, their blood glucose is going to spike because it's just pure carbs, pure, pure sugar that's going in. But if they were to potentially have their, chicken salad or something along that lines first or with it, maybe then that spike would be less because it's a combination, or there's ways to mitigate this.
There's loads of ways, absolutely, yeah. And eating regularly enough, like not waiting until your blood sugar's crashed, making sure you don't wait too long to eat in the morning, making sure you have a balance of macronutrients with every meal, making sure you have plenty of protein, as you just said, Chrissy. Yeah, I mean, but again, I'm not going to teach these people how to crack eggs. This is all basic stuff, I would say, for people who know what they're doing when it comes to weight loss. But those are the clues, those are the things to focus on out of the many, many things that it could potentially be, right? And the only thing is I might just look at the blood sugar category. I'm just thinking as a practitioner here to see if there's anything else going on. And we can see, that actually this person also has a genetic tendency for insulin resistance. They also have a tendency for pancreas inflammation. And so that would be a clue, by the way. I would not give like GLP-1 agonists like semaglutide, Ozempic or whatever to this person as a practitioner. I mean, I wouldn't give it to anyone anyway, but if you're a practitioner who tends to give it to people, one of the questions you're supposed to ask people is do you have a family history of pancreatitis, which is pancreatic inflammation?
And why does that, why does semaglutide, why does that increase the pancreatitis?
I think it's because of the slowing of the motility of the whole digestive tract, but there may be more to it that I'm unaware of. But I believe it's as simple as that. But I know for definite that it is a recognized side effect, and so they're supposed to make sure you don't have that tendency before prescribing it to you. So yeah, that would be something that you would definitely want to be aware of. And other than that, I think, yeah, it's pretty much stuff that we've already looked at. But insulin resistance as well. So again, just confirmation that that is something worth testing. And also, insulin resistance is famously associated more with, fat around the midsection. So again, there's more kind of confirmation of that tendency, and you can ask them, do you tend to hold on to weight there? It may not be the only place they hold on to weight. Maybe they do somewhere else, and that doesn't invalidate this, but it could explain, for instance, if they hold on to weight everywhere, but then they're losing weight, but for some reason the belly fat is the one that they find the hardest to lose, right? So that could be, another potential explanation for that, and that will tell you that, to look into lowering insulin, getting insulin and blood sugar more under control, in balance.
Wow. So there's a lot to look at here. And as well, what I also like too is just having that quick overview, especially if somebody's saying that, then there are suggestions that you can go for, like we just mentioned about the different ways to eat your food in the correct order and make sure you're not spiking it, or choosing or looking at your glycemic load overall in those places. And then also checking to the thyroid health and if you might need some support there, or potentially some other hormones. So it's amazing that just here in the genetic, just looking at that, and I know we touched on it in part one, but also to looking at it from this specific space of weight loss, it's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And every person's different, This is, as I say, there's like this triumvirate here. But for some people it's one thing, for some people it's like 10 things. There's a lot for them to deal with. So yeah, let's next look at attention. And I just had a quick scan here, and I can see that this is maybe a different one where it's not as obvious what's going on with this person. So this person did present with symptoms of ADHD, I remember, Chrissy. And yet so then I chose the category brain health, right, as a starting point. And I'm looking at it. And so again, this stress thing is there, which we'll look at in more detail in a sec. And there's this tendency for tics. Okay. Not really relevant. Increased need for DHA, lower activity of PMT, which is this gene that creates choline for you. So, relate to issues of memory and stuff like that. But I often look at that more for detoxification in the liver. So there's nothing really super relevant here that would immediately jump out at me as like, okay, this is what's going on. And of course, one of the things that we don't have here in the red category is the attention report. So I'm actually going to scroll down a bit more. And, it's interesting. Typical cognition, typical processing speed, typical memory performance, typical short-term memory, typical brain fog. So if this person does have issues with their brain, I would not jump to the conclusion that these are genetic issues that they're going to have to some degree, put up with, like just accept that it's more difficult for them than other people. Because in this case, that's not, there's barely anything there that would
Right.
indicate that.
Yeah.
So we do have a report on dopamine, which is considered to be the, root cause of ADHD, low dopamine. I say it's considered to be because, of course, the treatment is usually drugs that raise the level of dopamine, and those drugs are effective at alleviating the symptoms, and so it's considered, case closed. So the dopamine is normal, and then the attention here, which is our ADHD report, I think we're not allowed to say ADHD, but it's called the attention report, is actually lower risk.
Interesting. So going back to part 1 too, where we said that the genetics aren't necessarily matching up, then this is one of those times.
Yeah. And so if you're completely new to us, then this might, and if this is the first thing you looked at, it might make you think, oh, it doesn't work. But if you've had enough experience with us and you know how accurate, overall the reports are, then you, as a practitioner, would go, okay, this is telling me that if the person has the symptoms of it, and of course that has to be checked because these days everyone kind of thinks they have a lot of different issues. They're self-diagnosed on social media, whatever. But there's a fairly, there's an easy kind of checklist test you can do for ADHD that gives a general impression. Of course, a full diagnosis would require a mental health professional. But, the checklists are fairly indicative of it. And so if you've been for that with someone, you've asked them those, I think 24 questions, something like that, and they've answered yes to almost everything honestly, you can go, okay, well, I don't think they're making it up. So, and yet they seem to have the symptoms of it, and yet it's not on their genetics. The conclusion that I would come to is that there's not a genetic basis for it, which is good, which means it can be fully resolved. So then I would look at, okay, so what's causing them to have those symptoms if there isn't just a genetic basis for them to have them? And in fact, there's a clue to it right here. So we can see that this person has higher activity of COMT, COMT.
You might have to explain what COMT is for anybody that might not know.
Yeah. This is something a lot of practitioners may not know as well, unless they've watched every episode of our podcast, because I've talked about it a few times. So I'll try and do it quickly because I spent a long time talking about COMT. COMT is one of the two main genes that breaks down catecholamines. Catecholamines means the adrenal neurotransmitters. So specifically dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, those three. Those are also broken down by another gene called MAO, enzyme called MAO. We might see that on our travels here as well. But COMT is the main one. MAO also breaks down serotonin and other things. So COMT higher activity means that this person breaks down stress chemicals quickly. Now, that would seem to be a good thing because generally we think of stress chemicals as bad. And also, if this person breaks down stress chemicals quickly, then why would it also say that I have high anxiety? That seems to, potentially conflict. Well, what I have observed with COMT is that there is an upside to it, which is that they tend to recover from extreme stress more quickly than the average person, because during a period of extreme stress, the body, blood, nervous system gets flooded with these catecholamines, these adrenal chemicals. But this COMT gene means that the person can clear it away very quickly. So it should mean that they're not still completely in a wired, fried state days later. They can kind of calm back down again. Okay, so that's a definite benefit of COMT, and it means they're very suited to be in, very stressful, chaotic environments potentially, because they're able to recover from it, like I don't know, a firefighter or something like that. The downside to it is that it also breaks down dopamine very, very fast and very quickly. And so dopamine is that chemical that gives us, more than anything, it's desire. It's desire and motivation. But a secondary function of desire and motivation is focus. Because if we have no desire and motivation, we're in a very sleepy, dreamy, trancey kind of GABA, Vicodin, no, not Vicodin. What was I thinking of? Xanax kind of state,
yeah, that's
right?
the one. Benzodiazepine land, yes.
Yeah, a Quaaludes even, right? Where you don't feel the need to focus because you feel so relaxed, right? So focus is a function of the opposite of relaxation, but focus is the kind of pleasurable non-relaxation. It relates to the ventral vagal system from the free nervous system functions theory, the polyvagal theory, which again I've explained in detail in previous episodes. So it's the one where we are attentive and focused and present, and ideally we're also relaxed, although it depends what else is with the dopamine. So if with the dopamine we've got GABA, then we're in a kind of pretty optimal state. But if with the dopamine is a bunch of adrenaline and noradrenaline, it might indicate that, like a firefighter, we are very focused, but we're also very on edge because we're in a dangerous situation. So it kind of depends what's with it. Anyway, with this person, the dopamine is going to tend to get broken down quickly. And so even though the attention report, because of course there's a lot more that goes into ADHD other than only dopamine, and so this person doesn't have a tendency for low dopamine full stop. But so all things being equal, they should be okay. But of course, there are things you can do to speed up COMT even more. And that person may be doing those things. And so that may be a clue. Because the other reports, the dopamine and attention, say the opposite, I wouldn't put everything down to this. But these two kind of cancel each other out in a way, is what I'm saying. So the person tends to have normal dopamine, okay. But they also have a tendency to break down dopamine quickly. So, it's kind of borderline. It could go either way, right? They could be fine or they could be low in dopamine. Whereas if they had normal COMT and normal dopamine, I'd say the dopamine would be fine. If they had fast COMT and low dopamine, then I'd say they're definitely likely to be severely depleted in dopamine. Do you see what I mean? So this is kind of just like, it's in between. It's borderline. They may have a problem with it, they may not. We have to look at other factors as well, because these two kind of cancel each other out and make it inconclusive. So, and if that was all that was going on, I would say it still doesn't explain it. But there's this other factor, and it's this one. And we've referenced this one a few times, but we haven't actually looked at this report. So let's actually have a look at the stress report. Okay, so we're actually looking at this person's stress report now. So again, as I said, often I will, not even look at the inside of the report when I'm working with someone, but occasionally, especially in a situation like this where it's a bit inconclusive and you're not quite sure, this is where it may be worth looking at one. And so the fact that the stress report has been right at the top left of a lot of the times that a lot of the categories we looked at, that indicates it's probably very high risk. So I've decided to open this one up as I would in a consult and have a little look. And sure enough, so first thing it notes is that up to 45% of differences, so I'd say it means 40-ish% of differences, maybe down to genetics. So there's a big genetic component to stress in general. And if we look here on the right, it says 99th percentile. So this person, this is very high. So this person has a tendency for high levels of stress and therefore high levels of stress hormones. As it explains here, the HPA axis makes your body release adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. It doesn't mention dopamine, but that is another one as well. And so we can see this report, it says it is based on 383,309 different genetic variants. So it's a lot of variants that have gone into this calculation. So this, I would say, is more broad than the other ones we've talked about so far in the context of ADHD, right? The attention report is based on a lot less variants. COMT is obviously just one gene. The dopamine is based on, I think, a handful of variants. This is looking at hundreds of thousands of variants, and it's assessing that the person has, an extremely high level of stress. So they also have a high level of COMT. Sorry, they also have a gene, high activity of COMT. And so what I've seen in people who have this, because I've seen a couple now, is they have a tendency to have kind of the worst of both worlds, unfortunately. Dopamine is considered more of a luxury function to the survival of the organism than adrenaline and noradrenaline. So what I have experienced is that the COMT will break down all three of the catecholamines, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and in fact, these are interchangeable. Your body changes tyrosine to dopamine L-dopamine, then dopamine. It changes dopamine to noradrenaline, and it changes noradrenaline to adrenaline. So these are all related. So if your body feels like it's in a state of crisis, it will, break down all of those. It will tend to shunt more and more of the conversion into noradrenaline and adrenaline and keep those high specifically. And then COMT is meanwhile working, and it's faster than usual, and it's breaking all of them down. But, let's say the dopamine was medium, the noradrenaline was high, and the adrenaline was high, and then the COMT breaks them all down. So what you then end up with is dopamine is low, adrenaline is medium, noradrenaline is medium. And then that's the person's reality. They go between those two. They go between can just about focus and can't focus, and am a bit stressed and am very stressed. That's basically their life. So It's extreme stressed, a bit stressed, can just about focus, can't focus. And so that's a person that will then come in and say that they have ADHD, the restlessness, can't focus, can't pay attention to things. Obviously, one reason, let's say, not being able to read or not being able to pay attention to a lecture like this or whatever. One of the obvious things that you focus on if someone can't concentrate on something is the fact that they can't concentrate. Is the obvious thing. But another thing you can consider is the fact that they're getting distracted by everything else, right? Which would perhaps be called hypervigilance from a psychological, psychiatric point of view, right? These are people, when you're in conversation with them, they often interrupt you mid-sentence, not because, I do this. I interrupt people mid-sentence because I feel like I already know what they're going to say, and then I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's like, come on, let's keep moving.
That's more the kind of, I don't know, I think that's the ADHD type. But the other type is the person who will interrupt you to say, oh, look at that over there, right? And so that's less of the, trying to keep dopamine high thing. And that's more of is always scanning around them for danger, and so is frequently distracted by things going on around them, right? And so what causes that person to always be scanning for danger? Because they are very, very stressed, very, very anxious, right? So for this person, I would say to help them with their ADHD, although they may still benefit from dopaminergics, things that block the conversion of dopamine to noradrenaline, all that kind of stuff, that would help them. That would help relieve symptoms, but that would not be addressing the root cause, because the root cause is actually the fact that the adrenaline and noradrenaline are very high. That's the actual root cause that is indicated by this genetics, and unfortunately, that's not something that's easy to test. We usually test cortisol as a a proxy for adrenaline and or noradrenaline, but unfortunately it's not a very good proxy, because often, especially once people they're so stressed for so long that they start to become fatigued, their cortisol often drops, but the adrenaline does not. And so that's the adrenaline is one of the last things to go. And then when the adrenaline also finally drops, then the person gets like Addison's or close to Addison's, or chronic fatigue type of stuff. But Usually someone's pretty far along before that, and they can barely function. But for some people, they never get to that. They spend decades and decades and decades in this state of high stress but low motivation. And this also leads to depression. I think we said we're going to talk about depression, and we'll segue to that next, like officially. But when you feel when you feel, remember I said the person's going to be either okay dopamine, medium dopamine, or low dopamine, and they're going to be either medium adrenaline and noradrenaline or high noradrenaline. So let's say the average then is dopamine is like medium low, and then the average is adrenaline and noradrenaline is medium high. That's the average. Well, if that's the person's life experience, what that means is the joy, the enthusiasm, the motivation, the passion comes from dopamine, and that's medium low. So any joy in their life and motivation is medium low, whereas awareness of danger, problems, harm, worry, survival concerns, all that kind of things are medium high. Over time, if you feel like life is just a grim battle for survival, and unfortunately, when you feel that way, that often becomes your actual live life experience. Maybe you're in debt, you keep losing your job, you keep getting in arguments with people, you keep getting in conflicts, maybe you face actual dangers on a frequent basis. That can really, really, make you feel not good about life and not good about yourself and not good about the world and not good about God or whoever created all this mess and all the rest of it. And so it's easily and understandable to then go into kind of a shutdown, I give up state, especially because other than psychologically wanting to do that, there's also an energetic situation, which is that maintaining the situation of, we see here, this 99th percentile level of adrenaline and noradrenaline is exhausting for the body. And so the person often goes in the same way that I said that they go between, not able to function, not able to focus, and just about able to focus. They will also go from like having enough energy to function and eventually to not enough energy to function. And so that's where people will go from what we call depression and anxiety, because they're going between those two basic states. And often the depression feels so terrible because it's like futility, hopelessness, life isn't worth living, and all that kind of stuff. That is how it's experienced, this black hole of gravity weighing you down. That actually the stress and the chaos and the conflict and the drama and the crisis and the fear or whatever, it feels like an upgrade compared to
right. It's
depressive
fuel.
state.
It's like, oh, at least there's direction and there's movement towards that direction of actual activity or something that's, it's giving them energy, and that way they're fired up.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I did have one other quick question, and maybe it's to be added here, or we'll carry on with it. Is because how you've just recognized as well here that this may, and I don't know enough about diagnosing ADD or ADHD, but looking here where it seems like it's mostly, those symptoms, although they seem like that, is really stress, and that's what's fueling this not being able to focus. But let's say, because with ADD and ADHD, there are pharmaceuticals that are potentially given to be prescribed for those conditions, which I think are amphetamines, but correct me if I'm wrong. How would that then impact an individual like this?
Pseudoamphetamines, some kind of amphetamines. How would it impact them? Well, it forces the dopamine up, so then the person feels good.
But does it also force up the adrenaline and the noradrenaline, those stress hormones?
It does, but it's just that ratio of a dopamine to the adrenalines to where a person is enjoying life again, because and able to function way better again. Because as we just talked about, the person before that may be between the points of no motivation to do anything versus chaotic, panicked, anxious, worried, kind of barely able to focus. So that's, both of those are extremely low quality of living. And so being on any kind of amphetamine feels like a massive upgrade to those. Like I experienced it now. Like when I was younger, I was more in those kind of states. And to me, at those points, amphetamine felt like a massive upgrade because it was like the same, yeah, sure, the same high adrenaline and everything as before, maybe even more. But the crucial point is the dopamine is significantly higher, which meant that there was actually a positive feeling. Hooray. So that's a massive upgrade. And of course, it makes you much better able to function. Now, if I were to have an amphetamine, my focus would be on 90+% would be on the, oh my God, this is a really unpleasant level of adrenaline and noradrenaline. I'm not used to this. I don't like it. I mean, I get that with any kind of stimulant, to be honest. Certainly, I'd get it with an amphetamine. I would get it even with caffeine or something, which I know some people have their issues. They think caffeine's good. I get it. But it raises adrenaline, noradrenaline. That's not something that I need to have happen to me. Some people have genetics where they benefit from raising adrenaline, noradrenaline, and maybe caffeine is good for them. Again, this all varies. But for me, that would feel like too much adrenaline, noradrenaline. So that's not worth it to me. But to someone who experiences low levels of dopamine, to shift that to high levels of dopamine, it feels like a massive upgrade. But what is the outcome of it, to answer that question of yours? Well, unfortunately, the body downregulates the dopamine receptors and the dopamine endogenous production significantly more than it downregulates the adrenaline and noradrenaline receptors and the noradrenaline adrenaline endogenous production. So what that means is it creates dependency on that drug. You have to carry on taking it because if you stop, your level of dopamine will be even lower than before, whereas the adrenaline will not be even lower than before, so you'll feel even worse than you did before. So there will be that withdrawal or the come down, to use druggy parlance, which feels really, really awful when you stop these things. It's not as bad as opiate or alcohol withdrawal or benzo withdrawal, admittedly, but it's still pretty bad in terms of quality of life. It's not good, even though it's not usually life-threatening like some of those others can be. Plus, so that's the stuff that everyone's aware of. Plus, I think the stuff that people are not aware of is maintaining that highly adrenalized state requires a lot of the body's energy and a lot of the body's reserves of nutrients. Plus, when you're in that highly adrenalized and highly dopaminergic state, you tend to have lower appetite. That's why people often lose weight, or at least don't gain weight when they're on those substances. And so if they're very careful about eating highly nutrient-dense food, maybe supplementing, they may be okay. But a lot of people are not. They're skipping meals, they're not eating healthily, all the rest of it. And so you can get more and more depleted, especially of things that are rapidly utilized by those stress hormones like vitamin C, magnesium, potassium, most of the B vitamins. And you can end up very, very unwell. And this shows, very obviously in the classic amphetamine addicts, like the meth heads, where they start to look, gaunt and hollowed out and teeth are rotting away and stuff like that. Generally, obviously, someone on prescription amphetamines doesn't have such an extreme experience because they're on like a smaller dose, a controlled dose, stuff like that. They're looking after themselves better than the average, drug user who's using illegal drugs, but still, over time, they are depleting themselves and hollowing themselves out if they just carry on with those, which is why many of them don't. Because if you think about it, if it makes you feel so good, why would you ever stop? And there's a reason, right? Because sooner or later you start to develop symptoms related to the level of depletion and overstimulation that it's creating within you. So yeah, it's definitely problematic.
Right. So with an individual like that, by the way, as well, thank you for going into that because that's extremely helpful. Because you do see a lot more of people saying ADD or ADHD popping up all over the place. So it's like we want to try and figure out and find ways that are natural that are going to help our body produce what it needs to do. So in an instance like this, and I know we're not this is supposed to just be quick for practitioners and all, but it's highly fascinating and really big out there. So, but for this individual, like what would you recommend?
Well, for this individual, lack of dopamine is not the primary issue. It's a secondary issue because of that COMT gene, but it's not the primary issue. The primary issue is this tendency to have high levels of adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? So, and unfortunately, as it's, as we saw in the report, almost half of that is down to genetics. So, doesn't mean there's nothing they can do, but it means that no matter what they do, it will be harder for them than the average person who doesn't have that genetic tendency. And so that's something that's important to realize and just accept. Now, once we're clear that that's just the way it is, we then look at, okay, well, what can we do to mitigate that? Well, we've really discussed one of the things. One of the things that's key to keeping adrenaline, noradrenaline down is to keep blood sugar balanced. So it's actually back to that key point that we already talked about. One of the primary reasons that your body raises adrenaline, noradrenaline is because of a lowering or an anticipated lowering of blood sugar. And so the body then raises those in order to liberate sugar from storage or break protein down into sugar and all of that kind of stuff. So blood sugar is key. And of course, it's key in general for anyone, but it's key for this person specifically because we've seen that they have a problem with that. So that's a big deal. Making sure they have the building blocks, making sure they have, like protein, for instance, enough of that as well. So protein includes tyrosine. Tyrosine is the building block for dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline. If they have a tendency to have that be very high, then they may be depleting themselves of that, and they may feel better with more tyrosine. And from memory, that was the case. This person did. And of course, if your body is making a lot of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine out of tyrosine, there may not be enough tyrosine left to make enough thyroxine, which is thyroid hormone, which is something that we've talked about before.
Wow.
If you catch it early, and again, this doesn't mean you have to supplement with an amino acid necessarily, but if you are on a medium or low protein diet, or maybe you have digestive issues that mean you're not absorbing the protein very well or whatever, and you have this genetic tendency, then you can easily end up with not enough tyrosine to go around. And so this could be, it tends to be the thyroid that suffers the most in my experience. So if you catch it early and make sure the person gets enough protein and tyrosine, then they may never develop hypothyroid. If you catch it later, they might feel better, but they might still need thyroid support. So that would be another thing. And then looking, potentially things that block the conversion of dopamine to adrenaline, noradrenaline, but that's more like drug-like substances, but certainly something that a doctor who's able to prescribe could consider. It's we could also look at other prescriptions. We could look at all the standard stuff to keep stress chemicals bearable, like is included in our anti-stress formula, for instance, in the Rejuvenate store, like passion flower extract and saffron and ashwagandha and hops and all of that kind of herbal stuff to keep the stress chemicals down a little bit. And hormonally, we've talked about this before, how other than insulin, blood sugar, I guess that's hormonally, but another hormonal thing is if thyroid is low, then adrenaline will be high. So keeping thyroid high will help to keep adrenaline low and under control. And sex hormones, right? For women, more progesterone. For men, more testosterone, but really DHT. Because of GABA, right? So increasing GABA hormonally, potentially through other means as well. Things like L-theanine might be good. So basically, if I were to sum it up, strategies to reduce the stress chemicals and conversion to stress chemicals, strategies to increase GABA would be what I would do. And I've just said a bunch of chemical kind of stuff, but lifestyle stuff as well, right? Making sure you get enough sleep, maybe therapy, hypnotherapy, meditation, or body work, any and everything that gets the person in a habit of going down those neural pathways of relaxation, which will be going against the tide, because the tide of their neurochemistry will be pushing them towards stress and overstimulation. And so, but practices can be done to help them go against the tide. Exercise, even, right? I mean, all of the usual lifestyle stuff. Not having blue light at night. Maybe red light. All the many things that we've talked about. Because a lot of this channel is focused on how to optimize metabolism and reduce stress. We've talked about that a lot. So I'm just picking random things out of the air, kind of. But we've talked a lot about the kind of strategies for how you would address this kind of situation already. And practitioners watching are going to have their own preferred strategies, right? But hopefully they'll be utilizing a lot of the things I just said.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. I love that. That was really great because it's one of those things of, like, when you first opened up my eyes to the world of genetics and how, there's just certain key points in here that you can look at to help you understand, especially if you're in a situation where you're like, I just don't understand why I'm at where I'm at in my health and how this can really be a benefit. And I also love how you can go into a genetic report, get an overview and go, oh, okay, and kind of be able to pull, well, this person may be feeling like this, they may be struggling with this or suffering with that, without even ever speaking to them. It just kind of gives you that little bit of a window and a potential roadmap into helping individuals find what's going on underneath the hood, per se, and giving them more information so that they are empowered to do the things that they need to do.
Yeah. It's pattern recognition. It's very important to talk to the person as well, I have to say.
Of course, not denying that.
Sometimes the impression I get is inaccurate, because they haven't manifested their problems. I tend to speak to people who either are really struggling and have tried loads of things, or people who are really doing well and want to optimize and have been focused on their health for a long time. And that second category of person, often the genetics can be more misleading because they haven't developed a lot of the problems that the genetics would incline them towards. Sometimes it's funny, they'll go through and they'll be like, oh, no, I don't have that, but my brother does, my sister does, like people with very similar genetics, but they haven't manifested it because they have actually been following a lot of the recommendations in our program anyway, off their own volition, not because we said so. And so, so let's finish on stress. We're going to talk about anxiety and depression.
Yes.
I can do this one quickly. So, this one I'd go to emotional well-being, because we've really kind of pretty much covered this in terms of what we talked about before. But let's assume we haven't. Let's ask ourselves the question, is there anything else that could be contributing to that for that person? And so we can see again here, we got stress and phobias. We already looked at this last time, so I'm just looking at it through the lens of anxiety and depression now. Depression especially, because we already talked really about anxiety. So we can see, the person is low on one of the GABA genes. But I would, that's for breaking down GABA. So I wouldn't really think that's a factor. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else, but honestly, I don't really think so. And it's worth looking in here because low mood is one of the reports, right? And we can see if a person has that tendency. There's anhedonia, for instance, which is lack of joy. But again, the person doesn't have that. So low mood, which is kind of what we call depression. the person doesn't have a genetic tendency for that at all. So again, it's another example. I guess we've done several of those. What conclusion do we draw? Do we draw the conclusion that the person's lying about having depression? No. Do we draw the conclusion that our reports are wrong? No, as well, I would say. It's just good news that unlike stress, so this person does have a tendency to be stuck with being highly stressed to some degree, right? Obviously, if they do everything right, they can be less stressed than the average person because lifestyle and environment can still make a big difference. But the point is, it will never be as easy for them to be relaxed as it is for the average person. They will have to do more to experience the same level of relaxed because they're in that 99th percentile stress. The good news is, as we're looking through here, that's not really the case for depression. There's no significant genetic tendency for depression. Obviously, it actually says they're less likely to have depression. Low oxytocin can be a reason for depression. They don't have that. They do have this tendency for mood swings, actually. So we'll have a look at that. But that's really the only other thing. And so I would say the main factors are the ones that we've really discussed, which is if a person's in extremely high level of stress, it starts to, so they're in that sympathetic nervous system state for a long time, then that's very depleting for the body and the body's energy, the body's loads of nutrients. It also means that the body is less effective at detoxification. It means their body is less effective in terms of their immune system. And so basically, if a person does not utilize stimulants and they have that tendency to high stress, the natural thing to happen is that they will go between a state that they will experience as anxiety or stress, which is when they're sympathetic dominant, and periods where they are dorsal vagal dominant, or what they would experience probably as depression or low mood or whatever you might call it. Maybe just even tiredness, depending on how they contextualize what's happening in their mind, but a lack of motivation to do anything, plus a feeling of, it's like, I can't do anything versus there's no point in doing anything. There's some differences, but, at least part of it is in framing. So, there is a difference between low energy and depression. I'm not saying they're the same, but I'm saying they're in the same family. They're kind of related. They're not completely different experiences. And so, the person may experience it in those various ways. Now, I will have a look at mood swings here. So mood swings is how it's referred to in our reports, but this, what's the word? Pathological term that is used these days would be bipolar disorder. It used to be called manic depressive, right? And so we can see actually, the first sentence here, up to 80% of differences in people's chances of developing bipolar disorder may be due to genetics. So we're not allowed to call it the bipolar report, but we can say that to kind of say what it is. And so you can see with this person here, again, they're in the 98th percentile. So it's very, very high risk. Plus, you can see again, over 1 million genetic variants were evaluated to come to that conclusion. So this is certainly not based on small sample size. If we scroll down a bit, we can see the large amounts of SNPs where the person has, both variants that would indicate, a higher risk. And when we're talking about up to 80% of difference in people's chances are down to genetics, that's not like you're definitely going to have it, but it's getting closer to that, right? Whereas with the stress, we talked about 45%. So it's, around half lifestyle, environment, half genetics. With this, we're talking about definitely the majority being genetics. And so with this person, I would be surprised if they were consistently in a depressed state, but I would ask them, do you have periods where you feel very down, but other periods where you feel, up, where you feel either motivated or just, anxious and still full of energy, right? Even if it's not maybe positive energy. And that was the case for this person. Even though they talked about having depression, when I asked about it, it was not consistent depression. It was up and down. Now, despite this person having a 98th percentile risk, and the fact that it's 80% of it is down to genetics, this person was not full-blown bipolar. And that's because bipolar is a fairly rare condition. I think it affects less than 1% of people. So this person didn't have full-blown bipolar. I don't think I have spoken to anyone who has, but I've spoken to a few people who've had. One of them was on camera, actually. I remember I was doing one of these walkthroughs on someone on their podcast, and I saw that they had like a similarly high score, and I didn't think they had it, but I said that there was this high tendency, and they said, "Oh yeah, my mother's diagnosed with that." So there you go. But again, they were someone I think who had high risk, but they were very on top of their health and well-being, and that's why they didn't have it. But if they were to, one of the main things that starts off with I think maybe it's written here. The things that will precipitate a full-blown shift into proper bipolar disorder is trauma, alcohol, drug use, stressful trauma, alcohol, drug use, excessive social media use. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I guess if it's excessive enough, and bullying. And okay, 1% full-blown bipolar, but it says here 2 to 3% of people may develop some form of bipolar disorder. And so I'd say there the distinction would be that with all these things, and to some in the medical industry, they still treat it that way. They treat things very binary, like you either definitely have it or you definitely don't, and that's it. But we know with most things, it's a spectrum, right? And so this person's probably along the spectrum towards bipolar disorder, and they don't have it full blown, and they're still functional. But they should be careful. Like, this is the kind of person that I would warn that it's not a good idea for anyone to binge on alcohol or drugs. But if you were to do it, it is possible that it would, like trigger something in you. Like for me, I have that tendency for, like with cannabis use, that it could trigger like schizophrenia in me. There's an increased risk of that for me. And so I've got to be aware of that and, careful of that. Some people have that. So I would warn this person of that. So in this case, rather than it being an issue of anxiety and depression, it was probably more of a case of, first of all, that tendency for high adrenaline, like we talked about, and then a tendency for this up and down, mood dysregulation, which the underlying cause of that is not really understood. There are, obviously genes that correlate with it, some of which, a few of which are listed here. And, then there's therapy and stuff like that. And so this may be a case if if you're, I don't know, a functional medicine doctor, but you don't know much about bipolar, for instance, not that that's necessarily the case, just as an example, or a nutritionist or something like that, then it may be worth you actually looking for the report and seeing it. My theory on this, and I'm not an expert on it, is actually that lithium deficiency is one of the causes of this. And so I am happy that one of the things that's listed as a recommendation here, usually somewhere, is actually lithium. And so lithium is classed as a drug when they give massive doses to people with full-blown bipolar disorder. But it's also classed as a nutrient if you give low doses of it. And what lithium seems to do is it seems to help emotional stability. So there's this famous studies, I think I've talked about them before, where people in areas with the highest level of lithium in the water supply, because it is something that's naturally found in spring water, mineral water, to, on low levels, but maybe 1 milligram a liter, something like that. The people with the highest level of lithium in their drinking water had half the level of, I don't know what I'd say on YouTube.
Spell it out.
Harm of self and other. Let's put it that way.
Right.
As people who were in the lowest level of lithium. So low lithium correlates with high, extreme, violent crime. And I don't think that's a coincidence. My understanding is that lithium, as I said, it blunts the extremes of emotions, and so it's kind of typical that they don't recommend lithium to anyone. And then if you have full-blown bipolar disorder, they give you like between 500 and 1,000 milligrams, which will cause thyroid damage, kidney damage. I'm not saying not to take it if you've been prescribed that, because it may be keeping you from doing something worse, but I'm saying it's not great. But for someone in this position, I'd say maybe trying 5 milligrams a day of lithium, which has been shown to be completely safe, maybe something that's worth considering if you have this genetic tendency, just to help take the edge off the extremes of emotion that you may experience. And so this is a case where I guess we've had all three cases, right? We've had a case where a person had a problem and it was obvious based on the genetics what the problem was. We had a case where a person had a problem and their reports were saying that they didn't have it, and so we had to find what was really going on. And then we have the case where a person has a problem and at first look, it looked like it wasn't a genetic basis because the depression report said low chance, but then we just happened to see the what's it called? The mood swings report, and that was extremely high. And we were like, could that be it? And then we asked the person questions, and is this depression consistent, or do you actually also have periods of time where you feel very energized? And they answered yes, and okay, so that's actually what it is. It's not that you're depressed sometimes; it's that you have these mood disturbance, I guess would be a way of saying it. And so other than lithium, it's a lot of the stuff we talked about. Obviously, making sure you get enough sleep is key. Making sure you look after yourself in general is key. Not taking drugs is key. Avoiding traumatic situations is key. Keeping blood sugar balance is key. And a lot of the other, advice. All the stuff we talked about before, thyroid, etc. If you keep those stress chemicals balanced and you keep your blood sugar balanced, then you are unlikely to go into, a full-blown episode of bipolar either, I would say, especially if you've never had one before. And it should help to keep your mood balanced and should help to keep you feeling good.
I've loved these deep dives. I think they've been absolutely brilliant, and I may suggest, I know this is going to be ending on part 2 of our practitioner series, but I would definitely be interested in looking at some more of these reports and going over other kind of conditions that people may have and identifying them as you have done here. I'm finding it very, very fascinating. So listeners, if you want those too, make sure you leave it in the comments on YouTube so that we can follow up on that. But Elwyn, this has been great.
Yeah, and also if you are a customer of Genetic Insights, and you would if you're willing to have me go through your results with you in public, then then you wouldn't have to pay for a consultation. You get one for free, but we'll share it with the world. So if you are a person who has no sense of privacy, like I guess I don't, and you're okay with that, then you can reach out to me and let me know, and we will have more examples. But someone who I'm talking to right now, who I might be doing it with soon, Chrissy, who is happy to share their results. And there are a bunch of people who I have done this for, admittedly in not much detail, because most people's podcasts are shorter than this. But if you look at the playlist of Elwyn Robinson interviews, or maybe it's actually Elwyn Robinson genetics walkthroughs, there's a playlist where I have included all the people who I've done this for on their podcast that you also might want to have a look at. I said I'd do this before we finish, so
yeah, let's do that
quickly.
Yeah, let's do that quick whip around like a practitioner would. Let's go.
Okay. All right, so weight loss. Right, so stress may be a factor. Test for cortisol. Sugar cravings. How do they do with carbohydrates? Not good. Plus a tendency to overeat. Okay. So we should talk to them about the blood sugar, maybe test for those. Free T3, tendency for it to be low. Okay. Have they got any other thyroid markers? Let's have a look. Okay, yeah, also tendency for low free T4, tendency for low T3, tendency for low T4. Okay. Tendency for worse thyroid gene there. Even tendency for low iodine. Yeah, okay. So what we'll do is we'll test for low thyroid function, we'll test for blood sugar, and we'll test for cortisol, and we may as well test for DHEA and the sex hormones as well. And then I think those would probably be the 3 factors that would help you lose weight. So ADHD, let's see. So you've answered yes to a lot of those self-diagnosis questions for ADHD. Well, I'm not seeing here that, let's see, you don't have attention in the high risk category. In fact, you have it in the low risk category. And you don't have a tendency for low dopamine either, but you do have this high COMT here, so that's interesting. So that would indicate that you break down dopamine more quickly. I have seen the stress right at the top, so let me go to that report. I see that actually, yeah, you are in the 99th percentile of stress. Okay, here's what I think is going on. I think your problem is less low dopamine and more high adrenaline and noradrenaline in relation to dopamine. And this is what we should do with that. All the stuff we just talked about with blood sugar, all the stuff we just talked about with thyroid, all the stuff we just talked about with the adrenal hormones and sex hormones, plus these other tips I have for reducing adrenaline and increasing GABA. Now, you say you also feel depression. Okay, that makes sense. Let's see if there's a genetic basis for that. So, yeah, so you have a tendency high stress. Now, that could be, what's going on, because if a person experiences stress for a long time, it's a very energy depleting state, and that may be all there is to it. But let's see if there's anything else. Not seeing anything else. Not seeing the low mood report. In fact, but I am seeing this one. Okay, mood swings. So this one is more when you have a tendency to go between depression, but then some of the time you're in quite a highly energized state. Would you say that's the case? So sometimes you feel really busy and motivated to get on with stuff, but then other times you just can't see the point of anything. You don't have any desire to do anything. Yes. Okay. So in that case, your issue may be less around just depression per se, and more around not bipolar, but somewhere vaguely close to it, because you do have a very high risk here. In fact, is there anyone in your family who's been diagnosed with bipolar? No. Okay, fair enough. Well, that's good. So, but there is, the little bit of this tendency, and so you definitely want to avoid things like drugs and excessive alcohol intake. You want to make sure you get enough sleep and look after yourself, and all the other stuff we've talked about balancing your blood sugar and reducing stress. I think if you do all those, then your feelings of depression should also go down over time. So that's,
Brilliant.
Just doing it quickly.
Yeah.
If you had 5 minutes rather than.
Yeah, and that's usually what happens. There's not times where people do have, many times. I mean, usually when you're booking an appointment, sometimes depending on where you're going, especially if you're just going to the GP here, what is it, 5 minutes, 8 minutes? And then it's going, I mean, I know they're not going to look at genetics and things like that, but this is very helpful. So you can see how, we can go through it like this.
Yeah, and bear in mind, that was only the, what's the word? Just the review of potential genetic factors. Obviously, I skipped through a lot of the advice there, but, that's, however you do that as a practitioner, that's something you're going to do anyway. I was just demonstrating how much extra time this would add to a consultation, or, whatever you call it, that when you spend time with a patient. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be a lot at all. And in fact, I mean, I just did that demonstration this time as if I was talking to the client. But honestly, the other way, you could do that for 5 minutes before you talk to the client, if you prefer to not reveal your sources, as it were, or just show your conclusions at the end. And, you can talk to the person and say, okay, I think that, the main things we need to focus on is blood sugar balance, thyroid function, and reducing stress. You don't have to show you're working out. I guess I'd prefer it if you show that Genetic Insights has helped you, but that's probably just from the ego point of view, because who cares, right? As long as it's helping the person. So yeah, I guess you don't even have to do it in front of them if you prefer not to. It shows you just how quickly you can look through their results and get some useful information, however, whether you do it with them present or not.
Oh, and this is, as I said, I love looking at the data, so it's fantastic. And I'm really glad that when we were talking about this, you said you were going to develop the series for practitioners so that they could utilize these 7 root cause excuse me, 7 root causes of chronic diseases, and really be able to utilize what you've created for them in a sense, so that there's a bit of a roadmap, and they can help identify. And also too, I find this very helpful, not just for practitioners, but for others that are really looking at taking their own health into their own hands and being able to utilize what you're putting out there for them, because sometimes it can just be a minefield. So this is a really good blueprint and roadmap for people to be able to go on their own health discovery and journey and help them towards their optimization.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, even though this is a practitioner series, I realize in reality we can't control who watches it. And so that's why I spent half the time kind of explaining stuff that practitioners already know. So if we do end up doing a course of practitioners, in that one, we will exclusively stick to assuming that people already know all the basics, and it will probably have a lot more information, but maybe even be shorter because I'm not explaining basic stuff. But I think it's good to explain that basic stuff, because I think probably still the majority of people watching will end up being people who are not practitioners. But if that's you, that's awesome. That's totally fine if you're not a practitioner. But I would say please forward this to a practitioner who you think is open to it. A lot more than you think, or than maybe you're suspicious or cynical, might be open to it, because it's genetics, right? This is not showing even nutrition or detoxification or any of those kind of things that very mainstream practitioners are more close to. They mainstream medicine basically says that most causes of diseases are either genetic or infectious, right? And we can criticize that as being incomplete. I mean, I would say that's 2 out of 7, obviously. 2 out of 7 of the root causes that we identify in the Rejuvenate blueprint. But whatever, that's what they're kind of pre-programmed to believe. And so this is really, there is a possibility they'll receive this well. And, when we looked through the reports, you could see there was a lot of citations for, pretty much every sentence that's in the reports there are citations for, and they can click on those and they can see the studies. So this is something that you can share with a practitioner. So I know a lot of people watching this, because we've had a lot of people now who have got genetic insights, and I'm sure a lot of them are watching. And so I hope this helps you to look through your own, or look through other people's, family members or whoever else maybe uses genetic insights. It helps you to guide them through it. But definitely also forward it to any practitioner who you think might be open to it. Like, we need this to be an essential first step of their diagnostic process. Not that we can diagnose anything, but as I said, the first step in a diagnostic process. Just looking for those risk factors initially, and then doing the tests and asking the questions that then can lead to a diagnosis, right? Not that we're diagnosing anything, but we just help them, and therefore you, by significantly narrowing down what to test for. Now, I suppose you could say, okay, well, a practitioner who's got decades of experience, they already know that based on their experience. But here's the thing. They know that based on experience, but they're kind of using the Occam's razor principle of, what's the saying? If you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. Like, it's the most likely thing is what you should assume that it is. And that's, statistically, that is the correct approach if you do not have access to something like what we do. But if you do have access to something like what we do, which you should, this is why I'm trying to make people aware of this, then occasionally it is a zebra, right? Occasionally it is something unusual. Occasionally there is a high chance of it being something atypical. And so using the genetics will help you identify when that is the case, when it is something that you may not commonly think of. And so I hope that this has given some examples of that. And as you say, Chrissy, hopefully we'll do more in the future to give more examples.
Yeah, I think for me, the examples, I love looking at them. I'm also a very visual learner, so I like to be able to see that. So again, if you're listening just to this purely audio, you might want to go check us out on the video platforms, which are YouTube and Rumble. But yeah, definitely, I'm open to more of these. I know we've still got our 2 through 7 to get through, so we'll put them in there someplace. But this has been really, really educational, a great look, and very insightful. And so, yeah. Brilliant. I'm looking forward to our next step, which is going to be, Elwin, you want to give our lovely listeners a little clue?
Deficiencies or building blocks, commonly referred to as nutrition.
Fantastic. No, I'm looking very much forward to that one. But everyone, thank you again so much for joining us. Please, please, please remember to hit the like and subscribe button, because especially when we're doing this series, we don't want you guys to miss out. We will do our best to put everything we can in the description and put the links where we can. But and if you can't find it, please let us know and put it in the comments. Especially on YouTube, we're really able to access those. And we, as always, have enjoyed spending our time with you, and we look forward to doing it again. So we will see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above, and make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.